gunman opens fire at an ICE facility in Dallas. At least one person is dead, according to police, and we are live with the very latest.
So at approximately 6:30 in the morning Dallas local time, the local Dallas police were called to respond to a scene that was unfolding near an ICE facility that is located in Dallas, Texas. And according to initial reports, it appears that a shooter decided to camp on a roof that was across the street from said facility and fire shots upon the facility, aiming at potential targets that might be there. Now, immediately, first instinct, first reaction to hearing that somebody is shooting up an ICE facility is to assume that, of course, the shooter happens to be a left-wing agitator or left-wing terrorist. In fact, this actually happened, I believe, in Portland, where a member of Antifa attempted the same thing. However, he didn't manage to actually kill anyone and was ultimately shot and killed for his efforts. Unfortunately, though, that is not the case in this particular story, because we have at least 3 people that were wounded by this crazed gunman. One of them actually ended up passing away, and the remaining 2 are currently at the hospital in critical condition at the time that I'm recording this video. Now, of course, the left-wing media immediately jumped on the fact that the 3 people that were wounded, including the person who was killed, are in fact detainees, not ICE officers. So they immediately decided to flip it and say that this was right-wing extremism targeting this ICE facility to kill the illegal migrants, because you guys know, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but the right wing, evil, white, and racist, and obviously this was an act of evil, white racism. However, this eventually ended up falling apart. We actually ended up getting information from Kash Patel and his FBI that apparently there was something written on at least one of the bullets in the possession of the shooter, and this indicated that he was in fact anti-ICE. In fact, what was written on said bullet was the words anti-ICE and what appears to be some kind of magic marker, but honestly, I'm not exactly sure, and that has not been confirmed at this time what was actually used. Now, some people are reporting this as an engraving, a la the Charlie Kirk assassin, a la the Luigi Mangione character, but in reality, it appears that this is a marker writing. So what appears to have happened as of right now, from what we can assess, is that the shooter ended up targeting this Dallas facility. He specifically was probably aiming for ICE agents, but of course, anytime you have a situation where you have officers and then prisoners or detainees in this particular instance, you have about a 10-to-1 ratio of detainees to officers. So this person, who very likely as of right now was motivated by anti-ICE sentiment, trying to go after the evil ICE Gestapo agents that he's been warned about by the mainstream media, ended up hitting 3 illegal alien detainees, killing one of them because he wanted to save them from the Gestapo. This is absolutely horrible. It's absolutely disgusting. And of course, the reaction from the left-wing media makes it all the worse. And that's what we're going to get into today. And we're going to start with this MSNBC segment.
Writing. The first time we really saw that was Brenton Tarrant in the Christchurch shooting in a mosque in New Zealand, and he was a fierce, white supremacist and neo-Nazi, and wrote all over his weapon and his rounds very hateful information. So to see this coming from, potentially the other side of the political spectrum is a little strange, because it is not something, if you are trying to, carry out some kind of message countering, more extreme right-wing stuff. I don't know why you would, use a tactic that a famous white supremacist who has been revered and copycatted over the years by other white supremacists, why you would do that. But it does appear that people are moving in that direction because they want people to know what they're doing and why they're doing it.
So look, this is a situation where in reality we have unclean hands by everybody to a certain extent. Every time there's a mass casualty event, every time there's a terror attack, every time there's a shooter, people try to figure out immediately if they're on the other side, and in reality it really is a black mark on how divided our culture has become. So I'm not surprised that MSNBC would platform an individual like this, but I do want to to point out that whether or not it is the case that the Christchurch shooter in particular was the first one of note to start engraving stuff on his bullets or on his firearms, the most prominent instance of this occurring, and in fact the one that I constantly think of and I thought of related to the Charlie Kirk case, was in fact Luigi Mangione, who had those messages that were portrayed by the mainstream media repeatedly as a bunch of people in the left wing were celebrating said assassination. Remember, there's a lot of details about the Christchurch shooting, about the memeing, and of course the videoing, and of course a bunch of other things related to that are more prominent features of that particular case in people's minds than the engraving of the bullets, which by the way, I didn't even know about in relation to that particular case, and I know a lot of details related to that particular case. So in my opinion, even though this was 10 years ago or almost 10 years ago, and you had that featured right there, in reality, this is not the right wing inspiring the left wing in order to do these crimes, in my opinion. I think that this person is picking up from the two most prominent shooters in recent history, which would be Luigi Mangione and of course Tyler Robinson. So that appears to be, if this guy's a left winger, what his direct inspiration for writing those messages on the bullets were. Now, of course, in this particular case, we are never going to actually be able to ask the shooter what the reason was that he wrote anti-ice on one of the bullets, and the reason for that is that it appears that the shooter has taken his own life at the scene, according to police. And by the way, I just want to put out a little bit of a side note. There's actually a gory photo of the alleged shooter post taking his own life that is going viral on social media. It's being shared a lot on X without warning. So just a heads up, if you're looking into this particular case, there are some very sketchy people that are posting that for engagement, much in the same way that they were posting the murder of Charlie Kirk. And by the way, making up all these theories about how Charlie Kirk's head moved just as an excuse in order to shove that gore in your face. Unfortunately, this was posted in a reply to one of my tweets. It didn't have one of those warnings where you had to click through it or anything of the sort, but other prominent accounts that honestly should be ashamed of themselves are just posting this blanket on their timeline in order to get engagement bait. I don't think this is healthy at all whatsoever for our culture to just be confronted with gratuitous, real human violence so often when we log into social media. And I feel like I remember a time where Twitter would actually put sensitive content above this kind of thing, and that way you would actually have to click through and essentially opt in to see that. But apparently that's just not something that they do anymore, and it's really unfortunate. And honestly, I'm kind of sick of seeing these kind of photos just thrown about, and I'm actually upset that the Dallas police or whoever ended up releasing that so quickly after the fact.
You can't just assume by that what was written on that shell casing that that's necessarily his motivation. He could have been doing that to thinking it was funny, trying to put law enforcement on the wrong track. This is where when you analyze the person's phone, computer, talk to his family and friends, that you get an idea of what his motivation perhaps really was.
Now, since this happened in Texas, friend of the channel and the guy who runs Current Revolt is investigating this particular case, and he appears to be the first one who actually ran the voting history of the alleged gunman in this particular case based on his name and his publicly available date of birth. And it turns out that he has a vote in the Democratic primary back in 2020, so at least at that point in time, he appears to have been a registered Democrat. Now, even though it's 2020, it is important to point out that early reports indicate that he may have moved to Oklahoma after this, and it just might be the case that it's more difficult to look up voting history in Oklahoma than it is in Texas, where it's obviously very easy to pull up. Now again, this all seems to align pretty much with where we're all thinking that it was going, because obviously the only thing that throws you off in this particular case is that ICE detainees were hit rather than ICE officers, but in reality, if you're firing into a room where there's 10 people you don't want to hit, one person you do want to hit, and you've never actually killed a human being before, that seems very likely to be the expected outcome. Now again, it is still extraordinarily early at this moment in time, and I think it would behoove all of us to kind of reserve judgment, wait for the facts like I would typically do on a story like this that is breaking as I'm filming this. In fact, there could be information coming in right now that refutes key points that I'm making as I'm talking to you about it, but the fact fact is, we now live in a timeline where people immediately rush to pin this on the other side. They're going after J.D. Vance for talking about how it's not acceptable to target ICE officers and call them members of the Gestapo, which, by the way, happened yesterday with a fake story from NBC about how ICE officers allegedly kidnapped a 5-year-old girl and held her hostage in order to force the father out of the home. And instead of taking down this story when it was proven false, NBC ended up just editing the story, even though the actual story in this particular case, which, by the way, was shared by Ilhan Omar, who also said we should abolish ICE, was that the father ran in to board himself up in the home from his vehicle, abandoning his daughter in the backseat of the car. So the exact opposite of who didn't care about their daughter was present in this particular case. The ICE agents just took care of the little girl, but we have members of Congress and the mainstream media framing them as this Nazi-esque organization, and obviously much in the same way that you label the Orange Man Hitler, couple people try to take shots at him. You label Charlie Kirk Joseph Goebbels, somebody actually killed him. In this particular case, if you label ICE, aka Immigration Enforcement, as the Gestapo, you can't be surprised, especially since it happened before a left-wing Antifa person tried this previously, actually ends up taking action based on that. But again, as of right now, we don't have anything 100% confirmed. A lot of people are concocting conspiracy theories about the fact that it just says anti-ICE on the bullet, or one of the bullets that are shown to us in the photo that was found on the roof with the suspect. So as of right now, we will wait, we will reserve judgment, but make no mistake about it, it seems like right now it is very likely that this person was motivated by some kind of anti-ICE sentiment. He quite literally allegedly wrote that on the bullet. And while I'd like to say, hey, let's let cooler heads prevail, let's wait and see and understand what's going on before we actually react, in reality, the left-wing media is not doing that. They're already pinning it on the right, and it's only a matter of time, if this has not happened already, before they blame Charlie Kirk or some kind of revenge for Charlie Kirk for this particular incident. I mean, I joked on X, even though it's definitely not even a joke, that the ADL is looking for a way to classify this as right-wing extremism, and the two choices that I expect them to go with are, of course, labeling this an anti-immigrant attack, therefore it's right-wing, or calling it a vague anti-government attack, which is a way that they actually smuggle a lot of Antifa attacks into the right-wing side in order to, again, portray that as something right-wing. Now, of course, we actually have to do a video on this chart that they keep putting up saying that most of the attacks are right-wing attacks and whatnot, because it's fascinating how broken the methodology is there. To give you a quick example, if somebody happens to be a legitimate white supremacist, but they end up getting into a custody dispute with their also white supremacist wife and child, is the reason they're fighting over this, and that person kills their wife and child, the ADL will label that as right-wing terrorism. They also label violence from Aryan Nation prison gang members and Aryan Nation outside of prison gang members that are regular, ordinary violence that happens during the course of, doing drug dealing and whatnot, as right-wing extremism. In fact, there was one specific case where they killed somebody over a drug debt, and that was labeled right-wing terror. So they're doing everything humanly possible to inflate those numbers. And by the way, in the same year that we're talking about, you had a black Hebrew Israelite who was giving out black Hebrew Israelite literature, who actually murdered cops after being pulled over, or murdered at least one cop. And they said that they don't know if that was extremism, because even though the black Hebrew Israelites are an extreme group, we can't possibly determine whether or not he believed the more extreme strain of those beliefs. So that's how those stats are gathered. That's how they smuggle in these premises to all these different reports in order to inflate the numbers. And cases like this, we have to monitor how they will actually be tracked, because again, it could very well end up on the right-wing ledger, according to the ADL, based on the fact that the victims in this particular case happen to be illegal alien detainees, or based on the idea that they're going to label the attack on an ICE facility broad anti-government extremism, which they consider to be right-wing. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts as of right now. Obviously, send your thoughts and supports to those who are recovering in the hospital. Just because you're here illegally and you're being detained by ICE does not mean your life has no value. I mean, again, the idea that you would try to murder ICE officers potentially and then end up murdering these detainees when all we were going to do is send them home is horrible, horrific, horrific, embarrassing, and obviously I would want the strictest punishment humanly possible for this person if he were still alive, but like a coward, he took his own life. But anyway, those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. As per usual, if you liked the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, social media, so linked in the description. This has been me talking about what we know day one of this ICE attack. Till next time.